Hey guys, what time is it at your place? Another sleepless night? Huh. Okay, stay here with me and you'll sleep like you never slept before. We're diving deep into the twisted, gritty, and downright unromantic world of medieval dating, where swiping right meant offering your daughter in exchange for a pig, and true love was more about livestock than butterflies. I promise you, this is not a story for the romantics clutching at fairy tales, but if you survive the first minute, the rest of this ride will be a glorious disaster. In the best way. Forget the candlelit glances across a ballroom or stolen kisses in castle corridors. We're not here for Hollywood's watered-down version of medieval courtship. Nope. We're here to witness the raw, transactional, often grim business of love in the Dark Ages, where flirtation was economic policy and marriage could mean survival or doom. So, grab a blanket, maybe grab a drink, then hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I'd love to know where my viewers are around the world. Now, let your imagination run wild, and let's get started. Imagine standing in a muddy medieval village, the air thick with the scent of damp straw and baking bread, or perhaps you're shivering in a stone castle, its walls echoing with the clink of armor. You're young, hopeful, maybe even a little smitten. You catch sight of someone. Perhaps it's the way they carry a basket of turnips, or the confident swing of their scythe. Your heart flutters, but before you start dreaming of long walks or whispered confessions, let's be clear. In the Middle Ages, you don't choose who to love. That decision has already been made by a council of very serious people. Your parents, your local priest, perhaps even the lord of the manor, all of whom are far more concerned with your family's livestock than your feelings. Dating, as we know it, is a fantasy from a future yet to come. There are no coffee dates, no flirty texts, no let's see where this goes. Instead, your future spouse has been selected because their barley field complements your pig pen, or because their family owes yours a favour from 3 harvests ago. Marriage is a merger, and you're less a romantic lead and more a clause in a contract, complete with stipulations about who gets the goats if things go south. If you're a noble, this process is even more rigid, elevated to the level of a military alliance. Your marriage isn't just a union of 2 people, it's a strategic maneuver to secure land, strengthen bloodlines, or appease a rival lord before he starts eyeing your castle. From the moment you could toddle, you were likely betrothed, promised to a stranger whose face you might not see until the priest mutters something in Latin and you're suddenly sharing a bed. Love? That's a luxury, something to be negotiated after the dowry is settled and the harvest is in. Maybe, if you're lucky, you'll grow fond of each other by the 3rd winter, when you've survived a plague, a bad crop, and at least one argument over whose turn it is to muck out the stables. But for now, your role is to nod politely, look presentable, and hope your new spouse doesn't snore like a warhorse. For peasants, romance is less about grand alliances and more about raw survival. Love in a village isn't sparked by candlelight or sonnets, it's kindled in the shared labour of chopping firewood, patching a leaky roof, or wrangling a particularly stubborn cow. Your ideal partner isn't someone who makes your heart race, it's someone who can haul water without complaining, who doesn't flinch at the sight of mud, and who, ideally, still has most of their teeth. A good match might be the miller's son, who's strong enough to carry grain sacks, or the baker's daughter, whose family has a surplus of flour and a knack for not burning bread. Courtship is practical. You might exchange a shy smile while shearing sheep, or bond over a particularly good turnip harvest. Love in this world is less about passion and more about partnership. Someone who'll stand by you when the frost kills the crops, or when the goats get loose again. It's not glamorous, but there's a quiet beauty in choosing someone who can face the long, cold winters by your side. Now, let's say you're neither a noble plotting a dynasty nor a peasant tallying goats. You're a knight, clad in shining armour, astride a noble steed, with a head full of questionable poetry and a heart full of longing. Welcome to the peculiar, melodramatic world of courtly love, a practice that's less about dating and more about turning unrequited yearning into an art form. Courtly love is the medieval equivalent of pining for someone on social media, except instead of liking their posts, you're dedicating tortured odes about their eyes like twin stars, or their laughter like a silver brook. The catch? The object of your affection is often married, usually to someone far more powerful than you, And your love is supposed to remain chaste, distant, and exquisitely painful. You don't court her with flowers or dinner, you court her with suffering. You tie her ribbon to your lance, wear her colours into battle, and sigh dramatically at feasts while she maintains an icy, untouchable grace. If you're very lucky, she might acknowledge you with a nod or a fleeting brush of her hand against your gauntlet. Anything more risks scandal, excommunication, or a very awkward conversation with her husband's sword. This wasn't love as we know it, it was performance. Courtly love allowed knights to channel their restless energy into something noble, poetic, and safely unattainable. You might spend years pining for a lady who barely knows your name, writing verses about her beauty while dodging arrows in a tournament to prove your devotion. The lady, in turn, plays her part. She's flattered but aloof, granting just enough attention to keep you tormented, but not enough to cross into impropriety. It's a game of longing, bound by rules as strict as any battlefield code, and yet, for all its absurdity, courtly love gave knights something to dream about, a way to feel alive between battles, even if it meant sobbing into your chainmail over a woman who once smiled at you during a banquet. But what if you want to express your feelings without all the jousting and poetry? Enter the medieval art of gift-giving, where romance is conveyed through objects that are equal parts sentimental and confusing. Imagine you're a lovesick villager gazing at the blacksmith's daughter as she hammers a horseshoe. You can't just walk up and confess your feelings. Her father's got a hammer and her brother's got opinions. So you offer a token, a carved wooden spoon, a slightly wilted handful of wildflowers, or, if you're feeling bold, a glove you've worn for 3 days straight. These gifts are symbols, heavy with meaning but light on clarity. A ribbon might mean, I adore you. A sleeve might mean, I'm serious. A cracked mug might mean, I tried. The problem? These tokens are open to interpretation. Give a girl your best handkerchief and she might think you're proposing, or that you just don't like her sewing. Knights and nobles play this game too, exchanging embroidered belts, locks of hair, or tiny pendants that scream, I'm devoted, while also whispering, please don't tell my confessor. The trick is subtlety. A glove pinned to your chest or a ribbon tied to your sword hilt says everything without saying anything at all. But woe to the suitor who gives the wrong token to the wrong person. One misplaced sleeve, and you're accidentally betrothed to someone with a lazy eye and a questionable goat. And let's not forget the ever-present chaperones, the medieval equivalent of a security camera that never blinks. Want to steal a moment with your beloved? Good luck. Your mother's watching from the window, your aunt's pretending to churn butter while taking notes, and the village priest just happens to be strolling by with a sermon about temptation. Courtship in the Middle Ages is less about romance and more about espionage. If you're a young woman, every step you take is monitored. A walk to the well, you're accompanied by your cousin Margaret, who's been bribed with a honey cake to report back. A conversation by the fire, only if your grandmother's knitting nearby, her ears sharper than her needles. Men don't fare much better. Show up with a flower and you'll face a gauntlet of sceptical relatives, all silently calculating whether your barley yield justifies your audacity. The church looms large too, with priests preaching against unseemly flirtation, and monasteries occasionally opening love letters to check for heresy. Sitting within a metre of your beloved is a privilege reserved for the bold or the reckless, and even then, it's only allowed under the watchful eyes of half the village. Love, in this world, is a public performance, and privacy is a myth. But there's hope yet. Hope in the form of a secret love letter, the medieval equivalent of a risky late-night text. Writing one is like playing chess with the church. Every word must be calculated, cloaked in metaphor to avoid suspicion. You can't just say, I like you. Instead you write, my heart is a weary pilgrim lost in the wilderness of your grace, or your smile is a beacon that guides my soul through the tempest of longing. If you're literate, a rare and dangerous skill, you scratch your words onto rough parchment, maybe dusting it with crushed lavender or a questionable splash of perfume. Delivery is another hurdle. Handing it over yourself is out of the question, so you enlist a courier, a loyal servant, a bribed monk, or a younger sibling who doesn't yet grasp the concept of consequences. Sometimes a minstrel might sing your poem in the town square, passing it off as anonymous while everyone winks knowingly. The risk is real. one overly passionate metaphor, and you're confessing to both love and blasphemy. But when it works, when your words reach their intended heart, a letter feels like a revolution, a fragile, folded scrap of defiance in a world that demands obedience. When the weight of parchment and the risk of a wayward love letter feel too perilous, there's always the festival, a rare, radiant moment in the medieval calendar when the iron grip of propriety loosens just enough to let romance draw a cautious breath. Picture a harvest feast or a maypole dance, the village square transformed into a vibrant tapestry of sound and colour. The air hums with the lively strum of lutes and the rhythmic thump of drums, mingling with the laughter of children and the clink of mugs filled with frothy ale. Tables sag under the weight of meat pies, their crusts golden and flaky, and honey cakes dripping with sweetness, their scent weaving through the crowd. Someone, perhaps the miller's boldest son or the baker's daring daughter, sports a flower crown woven from wild daisies and clover, worn with a reckless confidence that borders on defiance. For one fleeting day, the rigid boundaries of medieval life blur, and men and women, peasant and noble alike, can mingle, laugh, and, dare we whisper it, exchange a glance without the immediate threat of a priest's frown or a chaperone's sharp rebuke. It's a day when the heart, so often bound by dowries and duty, is allowed to dream, if only for a few sunlit hours. For peasants, festivals are a golden opportunity to step out from the daily grind of muddy fields and stubborn livestock. This is their moment to shine, to catch the eye of a beloved amid the chaos of celebration. Imagine a young farmer, his hands calloused from the plough, entering the sack race with a grin, hopping across the field with a determination that's equal parts competitive and performative. Winning might earn him a cheer from the crowd, but it's the shy smile from the weaver's daughter that he's really after. Or picture a lad chasing a greased pig through the dust, his laughter ringing out as he dives and misses, only to rise with a muddy grin and the fleeting attention of the girl who tends the village goats. Some show off with surprising finesse, juggling stale bread rolls or tossing horseshoes with a precision that says, "I'm capable, I'm charming, and I might just be worth your time." These feats, silly as they seem, are a language of their own, a way to say, "Look at me, I'm more than my father's plough or my mother's loom." The crowd roars, the ale flows, and for a moment the weight of survival lifts, replaced by the lightness of possibility. Dancing, though, is the true heart of the festival's romantic promise. The maypole dance is a masterpiece of choreographed flirtation, a swirling spectacle of ribbons and glances that's as calculated as it is carefree. Men and women weave in and out, their hands brushing as they pass. Each touch so fleeting it could be accidental, but so deliberate it sets hearts racing. The ribbons twist into intricate patterns, a visual echo of the tangled emotions beneath the surface, desire wrapped in plausible deniability. A young woman might spin just close enough to graze her beloved's fingers, her eyes catching his for a heartbeat before she's pulled away by the dance's rhythm. A man might guide his partner with a gentle hand, his touch lingering a fraction longer than necessary, a silent declaration in a world where words are dangerous. These moments are electric, charged with the thrill of what could be, even as the watchful eyes of parents and priests hover like hawks. The music, a lilting tune from a fiddler who knows exactly what he's enabling, carries the dancers through steps that are both ritual and rebellion, a chance to be near, to touch, to pretend for a few breathless minutes that love could be as simple as a shared smile. For nobles, festivals offer a different stage, one draped in velvet and laced with poetry. While peasants juggle bread, nobles wield words, crafting verses that compare their beloved's eyes to twin moons glowing in the dusk, or her hair to a cascade of golden wheat kissed by dawn. These recitals, delivered with a flourish in the shade of a grand pavilion, are as much performance as passion, each line a carefully honed arrow aimed at a lady's heart, or at least her favour. A knight might offer a trinket, a silver ring, a silk ribbon, or a pendant etched with a crest, its value measured not in coin, but in the message it carries. I see you, I choose you, even if only in this moment. These gifts are never hasty. A noble servant would sooner face a dragon than present a poorly crafted token. The lady, in turn, might accept with a nod, her expression a mask of grace that hides a racing pulse. Or she might return a token of her own, a glove, a lock of hair, each item a silent contract in the delicate dance of courtly love. But even here, the chaperones linger, their presence as unyielding as castle walls. A priest might hover near the banquet table, his sermon on temptation already half formed, while a lady's maid watches every gesture, ready to report any breach of decorum. One misstep, a verse too bold, a glance too long, and your flirtation becomes the subject of next Sunday's homily, whispered about from pew to pew. Yet, for all the rules and watchful eyes, festivals are a haven for the absurdities of medieval courtship, where creativity often outpaces caution. Some suitors, desperate to stand out, turn to methods so outlandish they border on the comical. Imagine a lovesick villager, too shy to speak, arranging the smoke from his chimney into careful puffs, hoping his beloved will decipher his signal before the wind scatters his courage. The plan is bold, romantic, and doomed. By the time she notices, the smoke is a shapeless cloud, and her father's already suspicious about the sudden haze. Or consider the young man who ties a ribbon to a chicken's leg, trusting the bird to deliver his token to his sweetheart's doorstep. It's a grand gesture until the chicken, unimpressed by romance, wanders into the butcher's yard, leaving the suitor red-faced and the village cackling. Nobles, too, indulge in their own brand of folly. A knight might challenge a rival to a poetry duel, reciting Latin verses about cabbages that somehow weave in metaphors for undying love. O humble leaf, your verdant heart mirrors my own. The crowd applauds the wit, but one wrong word, one accidental slight to the bishop's favourite vegetable, and the poet finds himself confessing to both literary and spiritual crimes. Others, desperate to escape the chains of arranged marriages, resort to theatrics that blur the line between devotion and desperation. A young woman might claim to be under a love spell, her eyes wide with feigned enchantment, hoping her beloved will rescue her with a proposal before her parents ship her off to a convent. A man might stage a dramatic scene, swearing he saw his beloved's face in a dream sent by the saints, a divine endorsement no priest can easily dismiss. These antics are risky. Nothing sparks a scandal like a wayward chicken or a poem that accidentally offends the local lord. A misaimed gesture could lead to rumours that linger for years, whispered in alehouses and embroidered into cautionary tales. Yet these moments of glorious, foolish humanity are what make medieval courtship unforgettable. They prove that, even in a world ruled by dowries, chaperones, and the ever-present threat of excommunication, people found ways to chase love with a creativity that was as reckless as it was sincere. Festivals, for all their chaos, were a rare crack in the armour of medieval life, a moment when the heart could speak louder than the ledger. A peasant might spend weeks practicing his juggling, not for the prize, but for the chance to catch his beloved's eye. A noblewoman might weave a ribbon with her own hands, each knot a testament to a longing she can't voice. These acts, small and absurd, were declarations of defiance, a refusal to let love be reduced to a contract or a cow. Even under the watchful gaze of priests and parents, the festival offered a fleeting promise that a laugh, a dance, or a carefully timed brush of fingers could lead somewhere softer, somewhere warmer than the cold arithmetic of duty. So, as the music fades and the maypole ribbons droop, you carry the memory of that day, the taste of honey cake, the warmth of a shared glance, the hope that love, however foolish, might just outlast the winter. In the shadowed hush of a medieval monastery or convent, where vows of chastity were meant to extinguish the faintest flicker of romance, love still found a way to kindle, defiant and unyielding. Picture a stone chapel, its walls cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the faint musk of ancient manuscripts. The only sounds are the soft shuffle of sandals on flagstones and the murmured cadence of prayers rising like smoke. You're a monk or a nun, your life sworn to discipline, to a rhythm of prayer, labour and silence. Your heart is meant to belong to God alone, your days filled with copying scriptures or tending herbs in a cloistered garden. But then, in a fleeting moment, you notice Brother Anselm's soulful eyes, deep as a forest pool, catching the candlelight during Vespers. Or perhaps it's Sister Beatrice's quiet smile, warm and unguarded, as she passes you the coarse bread in the refectory. These are dangerous observations, for in this sacred space, even a glance can feel like rebellion. It begins innocently enough. A shared chuckle when a hymnal slips from clumsy fingers, its pages fluttering like startled birds. Or a whispered jest during the long, solemn hours of compline, when the world outside is dark and the chapel glows with a golden hush. These moments, small as they are, plant seeds of something forbidden. Seeds of something Soon, you're finding excuses to linger near each other, brushing past in the scriptorium where the scratch of quills is drowned out by the pounding of your heart, or meeting in the herb garden where the scent of lavender and rosemary masks the thrill of a stolen conversation. You might slip an extra slice of cheese into her satchel, a gesture so small it could be mistaken for kindness, but you both know better. Or you pen a letter, ostensibly a theological musing, but its words drip with longing. Your virtue is a lantern in my darkness, guiding my soul through the wilderness of contemplation. To the abbot, it's a pious reflection. To anyone with eyes, it's a love letter in disguise. These sparks, though hidden, are electric, and they ignite scandals that echo through the stone corridors. Secret meetings under moonlight in the cloister's herb garden, notes tucked into prayer books, their edges worn from anxious fingers. In rare, whispered tales, a nun's silhouette grows suspiciously round, and the monastery buzzes with hushed outrage. The consequences are severe. Exile to a distant abbey where the only companions are sheep and silence. Public penance, kneeling on cold stone for hours, or a stern lecture from an abbot whose Latin name carries the weight of divine judgment. Yet some defy the rules entirely, shedding their robes to flee into the world, trading vows of chastity for a life of love. These stories, rare and reckless, prove that even in the holiest of places, the heart refuses to be silenced. Its whispers, louder than the tolling of the chapel bell. Marriage, when it comes, is not the dreamy union of modern tales, but a contract signing with the weight of a royal decree. Whether you're a peasant toiling in the fields or a noble draped in velvet, it's a public spectacle, attended by family, priests, and at least one nosy neighbour who's already spreading gossip about the dowry. The ceremony is a blend of sacred ritual and legal formality, steeped in Latin chants and the rustle of parchment. For peasants, it's a straightforward affair. A few vows mumbled before a weary priest, a shared mug of ale, and a fervent hope that the thatched roof holds through the next winter storm. The dowry might be modest, a few chickens, a sack of grain, or a particularly sturdy goat, but it's meticulously accounted for, with agreements about who claims the livestock if death strikes during planting season. For nobles, marriage is a legal marathon, a negotiation so intricate it rivals a treaty between kingdoms. Parents haggle over land rights, scribes scribble clauses about inheritance, and distant cousins weigh in on the compatibility of heraldic crests. The bride and groom are often little more than props, standing stiffly in their finery, nodding when prompted, and hoping their new spouse doesn't have a habit of shouting at servants. Love is an afterthought. The merger of estates is the true sacrament. Divorce is unthinkable. The Church views marriage as an eternal bond, sealed by God and enforced by social shame. Annulments are possible but require dramatic proof. Perhaps your spouse is secretly your cousin, a disturbingly common issue. Or the marriage was never consummated, a claim that demands sworn affidavits and enough blushing to light a fire. Most couples, then, endure. They share the burdens of life, hauling water, mending fences, raising children through plague and famine. In these quiet moments, some find a love that grows like ivy, slow and unassuming, rooted in shared hardship. It's not the soaring passion of a minstrel's song, but it's real, forged in the daily grind of survival, in the warmth of a shared hearth, in the silent understanding that comes from weathering another frost together. For those who dare to defy this system, choosing love over duty, the consequences are nothing short of cataclysmic. Imagine you're a noblewoman, betrothed to a lord whose castle is grand, but whose temper is legendary. Your life is mapped out. A marriage to secure borders, a dowry to balance debts, a future of embroidery and obedience. But your heart belongs to a squire, a man of no title but endless dreams, whose scent of hay and leather lingers in your thoughts. You meet in secret, whispering behind tapestries in draughty halls, or stealing moments in the stables, where the horses are your only witnesses. One moonlit night, you make a reckless choice. You flee, cloaks billowing, to a remote monastery where a nervous abbot, perhaps swayed by a past favour or a well-placed coin, agrees to marry you. The ceremony is hasty, witnessed by two sceptical chickens and a monk who keeps glancing at the door. Back home, the world erupts. Your father, red-faced with fury, threatens to raze the squire's village to ash. Your mother, clutching her embroidery hoop, weeps as if you died. The local bard, sensing a hit, is already strumming a ballad about your scandal, while the church mutters about excommunication. Elopements like these were rare, not just because of the courage they required, but because the fallout was seismic. Families disgraced, alliances shattered, and in the worst cases, swords drawn. Yet some couples prevailed, their love too stubborn to be undone. Their stories became legends, whispered at feasts and sung by firesides, tales of two souls who chose passion over politics, proving that, even in a world of contracts and cows, love could spark a rebellion that echoed through the ages. Widowhood, by contrast, offered a strange and fleeting taste of freedom, especially for women, who were otherwise bound by the expectations of fathers, husbands, or priests. A widow could manage her own land, make decisions without a man's approval, and speak in public without being shushed, a liberty so rare it felt like a miracle. If she was young, with fertile fields or a flock of healthy sheep, suitors appeared with alarming speed, some drawn by her wit, others by her suspiciously productive turnip patch. A widow's dowry, often returned after her husband's death, made her a prize, a walking treasure chest in a world obsessed with wealth. But she had choices. She could remarry, picking a partner who shared her love of quiet evenings or her knack for brewing mead, or she could hold fast to her independence, managing her estate with a shrewdness that silenced doubters. Men, too, faced pressure to remarry. Someone had to cook for the children, mend the clothes, and keep the household from descending into chaos. Second marriages could be surprisingly tender, built on mutual choice rather than obligation. A widower might court the baker's widow, whose mead is the talk of the market, or a farmer whose steady hands promise a shared future. But the church kept a watchful eye, frowning on remarriages that followed too swiftly after a spouse's death, as if grief should linger longer than survival allowed. Family disputes over inheritance added another layer of complexity. Nothing tested a budding romance like a brother-in-law demanding the butter churn, or a cousin eyeing the best cow, yet these unions carried a quiet hope, a chance to build something new, grounded not just in survival, but in the tentative warmth of affection, in the shared weight of past losses and future dreams. And then there's the cosmic dance of love, for in the Middle Ages, romance was not merely personal, it was written in the stars, etched in omens, and subject to the whims of fate. Before you dared to whisper your beloved's name, you might consult a monk astrologer, his charts spread across a candlelit table, to determine if your signs aligned. Was your beloved born under a cursed moon? Is Venus in retrograde casting a shadow over your hopes? A misaligned star could doom your love before it began, and only a fool would tempt planetary sabotage. Birthmarks were studied with the intensity of sacred texts. Were they a mark of destiny, proof of a soulmate, or a warning of disaster, like a lover destined to bring ruin? The church imposed its own labyrinth of rules. No marrying your cousin, your second cousin, or your fourth cousin twice removed, unless you had a bishop's blessing and a purse heavy enough to buy it. Superstitions wove a tangled web around romance. A raven circling overhead while you thought of your beloved? A dire portent. A loaf of bread dropped at dinner while stealing a glance at your crush? Your union is cursed, and the village will talk about it for weeks. A fox crossing your path might signal betrayal, and a wise woman, definitely not a witch, though her herbs suggest otherwise, might bury a charm under your doorstep to ward off unsuitable suitors or curse your rivals. Love was a maze of celestial signs, whispered warnings, and the ever-present opinions of saints, stars, and suspicious grandmothers. Yet through this chaos, people loved with a stubborn, clumsy hope, navigating omens and rules to follow their hearts. Despite the weight of contracts, the scrutiny of chaperones, and the constant threat of a bad omen, love in the Middle Ages bloomed in the smallest, most human moments. It was in the wooden spoon carved by candlelight, its handle worn smooth by nervous hands, offered shyly to a beloved who might not know what it means. It was in the glance stolen across a bustling market, where eyes met over piles of turnips, and the world seemed to pause. It was in the turnip itself, washed with care and presented as a gift, its humble weight carrying a quiet promise. It was in the poem scratched onto a scrap of parchment, its words halting but heartfelt, passed through the hands of a bribed monk or a wayward chicken that miraculously delivered it. It was in the ribbon, tied to a sword hilt, fluttering in the wind as a knight rode into battle, dreaming of a lady who might never speak his name. The medieval heart was bound by rules, distracted by goats, and forever at the mercy of a dowry's arithmetic. But it was honest. Love was not easy. It was a negotiation, a risk, a rebellion against a world that valued land over longing, duty over desire. Yet every awkward gift, every cryptic letter, every fleeting dance around a maypole was a testament to its resilience. The heart, medieval or modern, refuses to be tamed, its stubborn pulse beating through the ages. So, if you ever feel foolish for a misfired message or a date that fizzled, take heart. Your love life may be messy, but it's free of the perils of wayward chickens, poetic monks with ulterior motives, or the crushing weight of a cow's pedigree. In the Middle Ages, romance was a controlled chaos, a dance of duty and defiance, where love, foolish, brave, and wonderfully human, always found a way to shine. Tomyris, warrior queen of the Massagetae, 6th century BCE. In the annals of ancient history, names like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar echo with grandeur, their conquests carved into the stone of time. But there exists another figure, less adorned by monuments, yet no less formidable, whose legend burns with a fierce, unyielding light. Tomyris, the queen of the Massagetae, who, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, struck down Cyrus the Great, the titan of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and plunged his severed head into a vessel of blood as a final act of defiance. Tomyris ruled not from a palace of gold or within the fortified walls of a grand city, but under the vast untamed sky of the Central Asian steppes, where the wind was her herald and the open plain her throne. Her people, the Massagetae, were a confederation of nomadic tribes, horse archers with calloused hands, warriors adorned with tattoos, bound by ritual feasts and a code of battlefield justice. Her authority was not bestowed by lineage or gilded titles. It was forged in the crucible of grit, leadership, and an indomitable will that radiated a clear message: cross her at your peril. The Massagetae were a people shaped by the harsh rhythms of their land, enduring brutal winters, navigating endless migrations, and facing enemies from every horizon. Yet among these hardened nomads, Tomyris was a singular force, a warrior who rode with her troops, a lawgiver who dispensed justice with an even hand, and a queen who stood alone, unchallenged by husband, brother, or rival. Our knowledge of Tomyris comes primarily from Herodotus, a storyteller whose histories often blur the line between fact and fable, weaving tales with a flair for the dramatic. His accounts, written decades after the events, are coloured by hearsay and the embellishments of a man who loved a good story, especially one involving divine omens, vengeful queens, and gruesome retribution. Yet, even if only a fragment of his narrative is true, Tomyris emerges as a tempest in human form, a leader whose defiance reshaped the course of empires. At the heart of her saga lies a clash with the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a juggernaut led by Cyrus the Great, whose conquests had already swallowed Lydia and Babylon, leaving a trail of vanquished kingdoms in his wake. When his ambitions turned eastward to the lands of the Massagetae, he set his sights on a people and a queen he could not fully comprehend. Long before the first clash of steel, before the first arrow pierced the air, and before the devastating loss of her son transformed her resolve into a furnace of vengeance, Tomyris was already preparing for war. A fight was not for glory or conquest, but for the preservation of her people's way of life, a nomadic existence unbound by the chains of empire. As Cyrus would learn, there are some queens you do not invade, for their strength is not in walls, but in the fire of their will. Cyrus the Great was no mere monarch, he was a conqueror of unparalleled renown, a man who could march into ancient cities, topple empires, and still be celebrated by chroniclers as a magnanimous ruler. His victories were the stuff of legend. Babylon fell without a siege, its gates opened to him as if by divine will. So when he cast his gaze upon the Massagetae windswept steppes, he expected little resistance. Who, after all, could stand against the man who had reshaped the ancient world? In a calculated move, Cyrus sent an emissary to Tomyris with a proposal, a marriage alliance to bind their realms. To an outsider, it might have seemed a gesture of unity, a romantic overture cloaked in diplomacy. But Tomyris saw through the veil. This was no offer of partnership. It was a demand for submission, a cunning bid to absorb her kingdom into Persia's sprawling domain and reduce her to a figurehead queen. Her refusal was swift and resolute, a blade-sharp rejection that left no room for negotiation. Cyrus, unaccustomed to defiance, did not take kindly to her rebuff. If charm would not suffice, force would. He led his army across the Araxes River, the natural boundary between his empire and the Massagetae lands, establishing a foothold on their soil and signalling his intent to conquer. Tomyris, however, was no passive bystander. She summoned her warriors, men and women hardened by the steppes' unforgiving demands, and consulted her tribal chiefs, weaving a strategy born of necessity and resolve. Her people were not bound by the rigid hierarchies of Persian courts. They were a fluid, fierce collective, united by loyalty and survival. Cyrus, guided by his cunning general Harpagus, devised a trap to exploit their nomadic austerity. He abandoned a camp stocked with opulent provisions, casks of wine, tables laden with roasted meats and delicacies alien to the Massagetae's simple fare. The bait was irresistible. Tomyris' son, Spargapizis, led a scouting party to investigate, drawn by the promise of plunder. They seized the supplies, indulged in the unfamiliar wine, and, in their inebriation, let their guards slip. The Persians struck at the perfect moment, catching Spargapizis and his men unprepared. The skirmish was swift and brutal. The young prince was taken alive, bound in chains as a prisoner of the empire. When news reached Tomyris, it was as if the world itself had fractured. This was no mere military defeat. It was a wound to her very soul. Her son, her heir, the future of her people, was now in the hands of an enemy who sought to break her. She dispatched a message to Cyrus, her words a blend of anguish and menace. "Return, my son, and leave these lands, or by the sun, the master of the Massagetae, I will drown you in the blood you crave." Cyrus, deaf to her warning, dismissed her plea. Overwhelmed by shame, Spargapizis took his own life in captivity, a final act that shattered his mother's heart and set her on a path of unrelenting vengeance. Grief is a heavy burden, but when it merges with fury, it becomes a force that can shake empires. The death of Spargapizis was not just a personal tragedy for Tomyris. It was a spark that ignited a war of retribution. She did not retreat to her tent to mourn in solitude, nor did she let tears dull her resolve. Instead, she mounted her horse, sharpened her blade, and swore an oath that would echo through the ages. Cyrus would face her in battle, and he would pay for her son's blood with his own. According to Herodotus, she convened her tribal council, rallying the Massagetae with a fire that matched the sun they worshipped. Picture the scene. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of warriors on horseback, their leather armour glinting in the steppes' harsh light, their bows and spears at the ready, their faces painted with symbols of war and defiance. Unlike the disciplined ranks of a Persian army with its phalanxes and chariots, the Massagetae moved like a storm, swift, chaotic, and unstoppable. Their horses thundered across the plains, their arrows flew with deadly precision, and at their heart was Tomyris, not a distant commander, but a warrior queen riding into the fray. This time, she turned the tables. Cyrus, perhaps emboldened by his earlier deception, underestimated her cunning, but Tomyris had studied his tactics, observed his movements, and waited for the moment to strike. She set a trap of her own, luring the Persians into a battle on her terms. The clash, as Herodotus describes, was one of the bloodiest in ancient memory. There were no elaborate formations, no heralded speeches, just the raw, visceral chaos of war. Horses screamed, blades clashed, and arrows darkened the sky. Tomyris fought at the forefront, her presence a rallying cry for her warriors. She was no silk-clad empress issuing orders from a throne. She was a tempest, cutting through enemies with a focus as sharp as her sword. When the dust settled, the unthinkable had happened. Cyrus the Great, conqueror of empires, lay dead on the steppe. In a gesture, as dramatic as it was merciless. Tomyris ordered his body retrieved, his head severed, and placed in a wineskin filled with blood. Standing over the grim trophy, she addressed it with words that have echoed through history. "You hungered for blood, now drink your fill." Whether every detail is true, whether the wineskin, the words, or even the battle itself unfolded exactly as Herodotus claims, is almost irrelevant. What matters is that Tomyris prevailed. She defeated the most powerful empire of her era, avenged her son, and ensured her name would be remembered not as a footnote, but as a legend. This victory was merely the beginning of her enduring saga. The battlefield lay silent, strewn with the bodies of Persian soldiers, their once invincible king reduced to a lifeless husk. Tomyris did not celebrate with parades or triumphal arches, as a Persian or Roman might have. She stood over Cyrus's remains, her vengeance fulfilled, yet her heart still heavy with the loss of her son. Victory could not erase her grief, but it sent shockwaves through the ancient world. From the bustling markets of Babylon to the temples of Egypt, whispers spread. The unstoppable Cyrus had fallen, not to a rival empire, but to a nomadic queen who ruled without a palace, armed only with her resolve and a cavalry of warriors who would follow her into the abyss. The Massagetae triumph was more than a military victory. It was a defiance of the imperial tide, a statement that some peoples, some leaders, could not be subdued. Yet Tomyris did not chase further conquest. She did not march on Persepolis, demand tribute, or carve her name into the annals of empire. Her ambition was not to rule others, but to preserve her people's freedom. She returned to the steppes with the same pragmatism that defined her leadership. No war levies, no dreams of imperial grandeur. The Persian Empire could rebuild, but it would never again look eastward without fear. This restraint was extraordinary. Most rulers, after such a monumental victory, would have seized power, expanded their dominion, or at least left a monument to their glory. But Tomyris sought only to protect her way of life, to ensure her people could ride free under the open sky. Her story fades here, with no further records to trace her path. No statues, no tombs, no inscriptions mark her reign. She slips into the mists of history, as elusive as the winds that sweep the steppes. Scholars debate Herodotus's account. Some argue Cyrus died elsewhere, the blood-filled wineskin a poetic flourish. But even the skeptics agree. Someone dealt Persia a crushing blow, and it was no king or general, but a queen, a mother, whose love for her son fueled a reckoning that altered the ancient world. Her legacy needed no stone. It was carried by the wind, and when the steppes breezes howl, some say they still whisper her name. To understand Tomyris, you must know the Massagetae, a people unlike the polished civilizations of Greece or Persia. They built no marble temples, wrote no epic poems, and left no libraries of scrolls. They were nomads, dwelling in the wild, boundless lands east of the Caspian Sea, where the horizon was their only limit. Their wealth was their herds, horses and cattle that served as both currency and sustenance. Their lives were a constant rhythm of migration, survival and honor. Children learned to ride before they could walk, their small hands gripping reins as naturally as others held toys. Archery was not a pastime but a way of life, their compact bows capable of piercing armor from horseback. Their armor, layers of leather and scale, was designed for the saddle, flexible yet resilient. They hunted, raided and fought to protect their freedom, their lives dictated by the seasons and the threats that lurked beyond the horizon. Unlike the patriarchal societies of their neighbors, Massagetae women were warriors, not exceptions but equals. When Tomyris took up her sword and led her people into battle, it was no anomaly, it was expected. She was not defying tradition, she was its embodiment, a leader whose strength and cunning made her the ideal of her people. The Massagetae valued strength, but also justice. Crimes were met with swift, equable punishment. Loyalty to the tribe was paramount. Property was often communal, shared among kin, and leadership was earned through deeds, not birthright. Their worship centered on the sun, a deity of life, light, and truth. When Tomyris swore by the sun in her warning to Cyrus, she invoked a sacred judge whose authority was absolute. To break an oath was to defy the heavens themselves. Tomyris was no outlier. She was the Massagetae's ideal, fierce, principled, proud. Her power stemmed not from her gender, but from her ability to lead, to inspire, to fight. While Persia relied on bureaucracy, satraps, scribes, and tax collectors, the Massagetae thrived on freedom. In one brutal, history-altering clash, that freedom stood firm against the might of an empire, proving that when your ceiling is the sky and your heart is the steppe, surrender is not an option. It is a curious twist of fate that all we know of Tomyris, her war against Cyrus the Great, the tragic death of her son, Spargapises, and the macabre act of plunging the Persian king's severed head into a wineskin brimming with blood, stems from a single source: Herodotus, the Greek historian often hailed as the father of history. Yet this title belies his penchant for weaving tales that blur the line between fact and legend, his accounts steeped in the allure of divine omens, epic confrontations, and vengeful queens who defy the natural order. Herodotus was a storyteller as much as a chronicler, drawing from travellers' tales, Persian whispers, and the oral traditions of distant lands. His vivid recounting of a queen who exacted such a gruesome retribution on one of history's greatest conquerors was irresistible, a narrative too potent to fade into obscurity. But how much of it is true? The answer hinges on the trust one places in a man writing decades after the events, who likely never set foot among the Massagetae or rode across the windswept steppes where Tomyris ruled. His sources were second-hand at best, rumours carried by merchants, tales spun by bards, and fragments of lore from a Persian empire still reeling from its loss. Yet his decision to immortalise Tomyris, to elevate a nomadic queen above the countless male warlords, tyrants, and kings of his time, carries profound weight. In a world dominated by masculine narratives of power, Herodotus chose to shine a light on a woman who felled a titan, making her story a beacon that pierces the fog of forgotten names, a testament to the enduring power of defiance. Why has Tomyris' saga endured through the centuries? It is a tale that weaves together the raw threads of human experience, tragedy, triumph, and an unyielding resolve that resonates across time. Her story is a tapestry of a noble woman's unshakable will, a mother's unbearable loss, a cunning enemy's overreach, a battle drenched in blood, and a finale so dramatic it could have been plucked from a Greek tragedy. Imagine sitting by a fire in Athens or Thebes, the air thick with the scent of olive oil and wood smoke, as a travelling bard recounts the tale of a queen who defied the mightiest empire of her day. The listeners, rapt, would have hung on every word, not because Tomyris wore a crown, but because she embodied a defiance that transcended titles. Her story was not about pomp or regalia. It was about a woman who, faced with the crushing weight of empire, chose to fight rather than kneel. Over time, her image evolved, reshaped by the hands of those who retold her tale. In the medieval era, chroniclers painted her as a savage Amazon, a wild and untamed figure from the edges of the known world, her ferocity both feared and admired. By the Renaissance, artists drenched her in blood, depicting her clutching Cyrus's severed head as a trophy of vengeance, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. She was exotic, fearsome, a symbol of barbaric nobility to some, a cautionary tale of unchecked passion to others. Yet beneath these layers of myth lies a human core, a mother's grief, a leader's resolve, that feels too vivid, too piercingly real to be mere invention. Herodotus did more than preserve Tomyris. He crafted her into a legend, ensuring her name would outlast the decrees of emperors and the empires they built. While history may forget the countless generals who fought for glory, it clings to the raw, unyielding power of vengeance, and Tomyris' story is its embodiment. For a queen without monuments, Tomyris' legacy has haunted the imagination of civilizations for over 2 millennia, her name a whisper that refuses to fade. Renaissance artists found in her a muse of retribution, a figure tailor-made for their dramatic canvases, where the interplay of light and shadow could capture the intensity of her tale. In 1622, Peter Paul Rubens painted her with an almost serene composure, holding Cyrus's severed head as courtiers gazed in a mixture of awe and terror, their faces reflecting the weight of her victory. The scene is stark, yet regal, a moment frozen in time where justice and vengeance blur into one. Another work portrays her overseeing the head's immersion in a blood-filled vessel, her posture commanding, her expression unreadable, a queen who has exacted her price and stands unbowed. To these artists, Tomyris was more than a historical figure. She was a symbol, malleable to the needs of the era. She could represent the punishment of hubris, the untamed nobility of a savage queen, or the audacity of a woman who defied the patriarchal order, depending on the painter's intent. Her image was a canvas for projection, a way to explore the boundaries of power, gender, and morality. Writers, too, were captivated by her story, weaving it into the fabric of 18th and 19th century literature. She appeared in plays that echoed with the clash of swords, in novels that lingered on her grief, and in philosophical treatises that debated her significance. Enlightenment thinkers grappled with her legacy. Was she evidence that women could govern with wisdom and strength, or a warning of the chaos unleashed when passion overrides reason? Her story remained a fixture in print, its allure undimmed by the passage of centuries, a testament to the enduring fascination with a woman who refused to be tamed. Remarkably, the Massagetæ, the nomadic confederation of the Central Asian steppes who called Tomyris their queen, left no tangible trace of her reign. These wanderers of the vast windswept plains built no cities, carved no inscriptions in stone, and erected no burial mounds adorned with gold to honor their greatest leader. Their culture, defined by movement and survival, left behind no permanent relics, no statues, no temples, no chronicles etched in clay or parchment to mark the life of a queen who humbled an empire. The Massagetæ, absorbed or erased by the relentless tide of later nomadic tribes that swept across the steppes, faded into the mists of history, their stories carried only in the oral traditions of a people who lived under the open sky. Tomyris's memory therefore survived, not through the records of her own people, but through the pens of outsiders, Greeks, Persians, and later chroniclers, who glimpsed in her a figure too extraordinary to be forgotten. Her tale was preserved by those who saw in her defiance a spark worth kindling, a story that resonated far beyond the plains where she rode. Her legend resurfaced across the centuries, each era weaving new threads into the tapestry of her story, reinterpreting her through the lens of its own values and struggles. In the Soviet era, as Central Asian nations sought to reclaim their identities from the shadow of imperial rule, Tomyris was reborn as a potent symbol of resistance. She became a folk hero, a beacon of defiance against the tide of colonialism and imperialism that had long shaped the region's history. In Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, statues of her rose in city plazas, their bronze forms capturing the unyielding spirit of a warrior queen, bow in hand, eyes fixed on an unseen horizon, as if still watching for the next challenge to her people's freedom. These monuments, standing tall against the modern skyline, are not mere tributes, but declarations of a legacy that refuses to be erased, a reminder that Tomyris's strength lives on in the collective memory of nations forging their own path. Modern scholars have further reshaped her image, moving beyond the medieval portrayals of a bloodthirsty barbarian to recognize her as a legitimate sovereign. Far from the savage Amazon of earlier tales, Tomyris is now seen as a leader of remarkable skill, a woman who commanded armies with strategic brilliance, negotiated with the confidence of a king, and ruled with an authority that required no crown or throne. Her story has found new life in the 21st century, where it resonates in diverse forms. Documentaries trace her legacy, piecing together the fragments of her tale through archaeological insights and historical analysis, bringing her defiance to audiences across the globe. In the realm of popular culture, she commands virtual armies in strategy video games, her name synonymous with strength and retribution, allowing players to step into the role of a queen who reshaped history. Academic journals dissect her story through the lenses of gender, power, and resistance, exploring how her leadership challenges traditional narratives of ancient warfare and governance. Scholars debate her role as a female ruler in a world that often marginalized such figures, analyzing how her actions reflect broader patterns of women wielding power in nomadic societies. No coins bear Tomyris's face, no busts or carvings capture her likeness, and no golden relics preserve her image for posterity. Yet her essence, strength, vengeance, autonomy, burns with a brilliance that transcends the need for physical monuments. She is a beacon that pierces the centuries, illuminating the shadows where forgotten heroes dwell. Her story a testament to the enduring power of those who defy the odds. Her legacy lives in the whispered tales of steppe nomads, in the bronze statues that stand as sentinels in modern cities, and in the scholarly works that seek to uncover the truth beneath the myth. Tomyris's spirit endures in every retelling, each one adding depth to a woman who was not just a queen, but a symbol of unbowed resilience. A figure who, without a single artifact to her name, continues to inspire those who seek to challenge the tides of history. In a world that often forgets queens who play by the rules, Tomyris is remembered for her rebellion. She did not seek history's spotlight. She seized it. Her legacy as vivid as blood splattered on a canvas, as sharp as the blade she wielded. She was not the first woman to lead warriors into battle, nor the last. But history has a way of casting such figures as anomalies, rare sparks in a male-dominated world. The truth is far richer. Tomyris was part of a lineage of women who wielded power through the sword, their names often buried beneath the weight of patriarchal narratives. Before her, Shamuramat, the Assyrian queen of the 9th century BCE, built cities and crushed rebellions, her deeds perhaps inspiring the myth of Semiramis, a legendary figure of conquest and ambition. The Scythians, cultural kin to the Massagetæ, buried their women with weapons, axes, spears and bows, their skeletons bearing the scars of battle, proof that they fought and died alongside their men. These were not ceremonial roles, they were warriors, their lives etched in blood and bone. After Tomyris Boudica, the Celtic queen of the 1st century CE, led a fiery revolt against Rome, her war sparked by the assault on her daughters and the theft of her land. Like Tomyris, she burned with a mother's fury, reducing Roman settlements to ash in a blaze of defiance. In the 3rd century CE, Zenobia of Palmyra challenged the Roman Empire, minting coins with her image and declaring independence, forcing the emperor to march against her. These women, Tomyris, Shamuramat, Boudica, Zenobia, shared not just power, but audacity, leading in eras that reserved leadership for men. While male conquerors were lauded, their victories inscribed in stone and song, these women were often branded dangerous, unnatural, savage, not for their failures, but for their successes. Tomyris's story, preserved by Herodotus's quill and rekindled by modern imagination, reveals a truth. Female leadership was not rare, it was simply rarely recorded. When you envision ancient warfare, see beyond the helmets and beards, picture a queen on horseback, her bow drawn taut, her eyes fierce with purpose, riding into the heart of legend. Tomyris left no palaces, no golden inscriptions, no grand tombs to mark her reign. Yet her presence endures, a paradox woven from Herodotus's vivid, perhaps embellished words. For over 2,000 years her name has resurfaced, a testament to the enduring power of a story that refuses to be silenced. To Renaissance Europe, she was the noble savage, a warning to tyrants who dared to overreach. Her image adorned canvases, her story a cautionary tale of pride brought low by a woman's wrath. To modern Central Asia, she is a folk hero, a symbol of resistance against the weight of empire, her statues rising from city plazas in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, where school children learn her name and politicians invoke her strength. Her tale is deeply human, a mother's grief for a lost son, a leader's defiance against an arrogant foe, a fight that pitted the freedom of the steppes against the machinery of empire. In a history that often erases warrior women, Tomyris persists, like a blade buried just beneath the earth, waiting to be unearthed by those hungry for stories of unbowed rebellion. She embodies the raw, unfiltered essence of humanity, mothers and queens, grief and vengeance, dust and blood. She is the silence after battle, a woman standing alone in a field strewn with the fallen, knowing she has reshaped the world, yet aware that many will doubt her deeds. Her greatest legacy is her refusal to fade, her name a whisper that carries on the wind, defying the passage of time. Tomyris's story transcends the constraints of history, resonating in every era that grapples with power and resistance. In the medieval world, she was a figure of fascination, her tale retold in chronicles that cast her as both hero and barbarian, a queen who defied the civilized order. Renaissance poets and playwrights wove her into their works, seeing in her a mirror for their own anxieties about power, gender, and morality. By the Enlightenment, she became a subject of philosophical debate, her actions scrutinized as evidence of women's capacity for leadership or as a warning against the dangers of unchecked emotion. In the 20th century, as Central Asian nations sought to reclaim their identities from the shadow of Soviet rule, Tomyris emerged as a national icon. her defiance a rallying cry for independence. Her statues, erected in modern cities, stand as monuments not just to her but to the resilience of a people who refuse to be defined by their conquerors. In academic halls, her story is dissected, her leadership analysed as a case study in gender and power, her defiance a lens through which to view the complexities of resistance. In popular culture, she commands virtual armies in strategy games, her name synonymous with strength and retribution. Her absence from physical records, no coins, no busts, no carvings, only heightens her mystique, making her a figure who exists in the spaces between history and myth. Her legacy is a paradox, a queen without a throne, a victor without a monument, a woman whose story relies on the words of a foreign chronicler, yet resonates with universal truths. She is a reminder that power does not require a crown or a palace. It can be forged in the crucible of loss and resolve. Her tale is not just about a single battle or a single act of vengeance. It is about the human capacity to stand against overwhelming odds, to choose defiance over submission, to carve a name into history through sheer will. Tomyris is mothers mourning their children, queens commanding their warriors, and leaders refusing to bow. She is the dust of the steppe, the blood of the fallen, the silence after the clash of swords. She is the woman who stood alone, knowing she had altered the course of empires, yet doubted by those who would write her story. Her name rides the winds of the steppes, a whisper that humbles emperors and kings, a warning that echoes through the ages. Challenge me, and you will drown in blood. When you hear of a great ruler's fall, pause to consider. Sometimes the decisive blow comes not from a rival empire, but from a queen on horseback, her legacy lost to time but never truly gone. Wanderers of the ancient world, from Scythians to Mongols. Imagine a world where your home is not bound by stone or mortar, but crafted from soft felt walls, a roof of tightly stitched animal hides, and a doorway that opens to the endless expanse of the horizon. There are no sprawling cities, no neatly tilled farmlands, no towering monuments to stand as testaments to time, only the rhythmic thud of hooves on earth, the gentle whisper of wind through grass, and the ever-changing canvas of the sky above. For the ancient nomadic peoples, permanence was not a goal but a fleeting notion. Their true power lay in their ability to move, to adapt, to thrive in constant motion. From the sweeping Eurasian steppes to the sun-scorched deserts of Arabia, these nomads wove the fabric of entire civilizations without ever laying a single marble cornerstone. They were not reckless wanderers, as some might imagine, but masterful strategists, their lives synchronized with the cycles of nature, the turning of seasons, the migratory paths of their herds, and an almost mystical understanding of the landscapes they traversed. Their dwellings, yurts, tents, or wheeled wagons were marvels of ingenuity, portable sanctuaries designed to be assembled and disassembled with ease, perfectly suited for a life of perpetual movement. At the heart of their existence were their animals, cattle, sheep, goats, and above all, horses. Wealth was not measured in acres or gold, but in the number and quality of livestock. Horses, in particular, were far more than mere beasts of burden. They were trusted companions, instruments of war and emblems of prestige. To ride with skill was to ensure survival. To ride with unmatched prowess was to command respect and authority. Yet this life of mobility was far from chaotic. Nomadic societies were built on intricate social frameworks, where power flowed through clans and tribes, bound by ties of kinship and loyalty. Leadership was rarely a birthright. Instead, it was earned through merit, whether through brilliant military tactics, the persuasive power of oratory, or the magnetic pull of charisma. This legacy sparked a haunting charisma. A chief or Khan rose not by divine right, but by proving their worth in the crucible of campfire councils or on the windswept fields of battle. Loyalty was deeply personal, forged in shared hardships and triumphs, sealed in the glow of communal fires or the chaos of combat. Far from being isolated, these nomads were the threads that connected the ancient world. They carried silk from the distant markets of China, spices from the vibrant bazaars of India, silver from the mines of Persia, and slaves from the far reaches of Europe. Their caravans, winding through deserts and steppes, were the precursors to global trade networks, serving as the world's first transcontinental couriers, long before empires recognized the value of such connections. When trade faltered, whether due to broken agreements or insufficient tribute, the nomads turned to raiding, their attacks swift, calculated, and devastatingly effective, striking fear into the hearts of settled peoples. Their history was not etched in stone or recorded in scrolls. It was alive, carried in the voices of storytellers, sung in haunting melodies and preserved in the collective memory of the tribe. Elders were the living archives of their people, holding within them the laws, legends, and lineage of generations. A single bard or tribal elder could carry the entirety of a tribe's legal system, historical record, and cultural identity in their mind, passing it down through oral tradition. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were the lifeblood of the community, serving as instruction, governance, and the very essence of identity. To the empires that gazed upon them, nomads were enigmatic, unpredictable, and often terrifying, a force that defied the order of cities and walls. But to themselves, they were the embodiment of freedom, masters of adaptation, and inheritors of the wind's boundless spirit. They left behind no grand ruins, no towering obelisks, yet their influence rippled across continents, reshaping the world with every galloping hoof and every journey across the horizon. Long before the Mongols' thunderous conquests reshaped Eurasia, the Scythians held dominion over the vast steppes from the 9th to the 2nd century BCE, their influence stretching from the shores of the Black Sea to the edges of Central Asia. To the Greeks, they were fearsome horsemen and exotic barbarians shrouded in mystery. To themselves, they were a proud people defined by liberty, vengeance, and an unyielding spirit. Scythian society was a symphony of mobility and martial prowess. Their horse culture was without equal. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could stand, their bond with horses woven into the fabric of their lives. Their weapons were both practical and deadly, short composite bows, crafted for precision while galloping at full speed, curved swords that gleamed in the sunlight, battle axes that cleaved through armor, and iron-tipped spears that pierced with lethal accuracy. The Scythian warrior was not defined by gender. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed what the Greek historian Herodotus suggested. Women fought alongside men. Excavated graves reveal female skeletons buried with weapons, their bones marked by the scars of battle, evidence of their active role in combat. These women were not exceptions but integral to the Scythian way of life, riding and fighting with the same ferocity as their male counterparts. The Scythians built no cities, but their legacy endures in the kurgans, earthen burial mounds that dot the steppes. Beneath these mounds, archaeologists have uncovered treasures that speak to their sophistication. Gold ornaments of breathtaking intricacy, preserved skin adorned with swirling tattoos, embroidered garments that rival the finest textiles, and weaponry that blends utility with artistry. Their art, rich with dynamic animal motifs and predatory symbolism, reflects a deep connection to the natural world and the hunt that sustained them. Yet the Scythians were not merely warriors. They were diplomats, mercenaries, and traders, forging ties with Greek colonies along the Black Sea. They bartered furs, slaves, and grain for wine, pottery, and luxury goods, creating a vibrant exchange that enriched both cultures. Greek writers like Herodotus documented their customs with a mix of fascination and horror, tales of drinking enemies' blood, or fashioning scalps into napkins, yet also praised their sense of justice and unwavering loyalty to kin. Their religion was primal, animistic, and deeply tied to the land. They worshipped gods of war, fire, and fertility, their rituals visceral and unadorned. Horse sacrifices under open skies, clouds of cannabis smoke in sacred ceremonies, and oaths sworn in the presence of the divine. Their worldview was not linear but cyclical, rooted not in ownership of the land but in a sacred dance with its rhythms. Over time, pressed by rival nomadic groups like the Sarmatians, and hemmed in by expanding empires, the Scythians faded from prominence. Yet they set the archetype for the steppe warrior, a mobile, deadly, fiercely independent figure, beholden to no master and tied to no fixed home. Their shadow lingers in the image of a mounted archer, bow drawn, silhouetted against the endless steppe. While the Scythians ruled the grasslands, the Bedouins carved their legacy into the sands of the Arabian Peninsula. Far from aimless drifters, they were architects of survival, mastering the harshest deserts with unparalleled resilience. Unlike the thunderous charge of steppe nomads, Bedouin life was a quieter, more deliberate rhythm, attuned to the cycles of drought and rainfall, the grazing routes of their herds, and the guiding light of the stars. Their homes, black goat hair tents known as beitshar, were marvels of practicality, lightweight, breathable, and easily packed for the next journey. At the core of their existence were camels, the ships of the desert, which served as transport, provided milk and meat, yielded hides for clothing, and functioned as a living currency in a world without coin. Bedouin society revolved around the clan, where loyalty to kin was paramount. Honor, or sharaf, was the glue that bound their communities. An insult could ignite a blood feud that spanned generations, but hospitality, or karam, was equally sacred. A stranger could expect food, water, and protection for 3 days, no questions asked, a tradition rooted in the desert's unforgiving demands. Their warfare, known as the Gazu, was a strategic art form, swift raids to capture livestock or goods, designed to minimize bloodshed while maximizing prestige and survival. A successful raid elevated a man's standing. A failed one could cast a shadow over a tribe's reputation for decades. Yet Bedouin life was not defined solely by conflict or survival. Their oral tradition was a vibrant tapestry with poets revered as warriors of words. Around flickering campfires, their verses wove histories, shamed enemies, and celebrated heroes, often delivered in a melodic, song-like cadence. Some poems became the foundation of tribal lore. Others endured as cherished legacies, passed from generation to generation. The Bedouins also played a pivotal role in trade, guiding caravans laden with incense, spices, and silk from southern Arabia to the Levant and beyond. Their intimate knowledge of every oasis, every star path, made them indispensable, and their services came at a premium. Though many Bedouins later settled in cities or integrated into empires, they clung fiercely to their identity. Even today, the black tent and the tribal codes of honor and hospitality remain potent symbols of Bedouin pride. They were not merely survivors of the desert, they were its living soul, embodying its resilience and mystery. No nomadic people reshaped the world as profoundly as the Mongols of the 13th century. From the rugged plains of Mongolia, they erupted onto the global stage, forging the largest contiguous land empire in history. Their origins were not unlike those of other nomads, mobile, clan-based, and fiercely adaptive. Life on the Mongolian steppe was unrelenting, demanding resilience and resourcefulness. The Mongols lived in gurs, circular tents of felt and wood, assembled in under an hour and packed onto carts by dawn. Their herds of horses, yaks, and goats were their sustenance, their wealth, and their mobility. Children were raised in the saddle, learning to ride before they could read or write. Literacy was rare among them, but their knowledge was vast, encoded in songs, proverbs, and the collective memory of their people. What distinguished the Mongols from other nomadic peoples was their extraordinary ability to transform their inherent mobility into a weapon of unmatched power, redefining warfare and conquest on a global scale. Under the visionary leadership of Genghis Khan, they dismantled the age-old tribal divisions that had long defined steppe societies, replacing them with a revolutionary system rooted in meritocracy and unwavering loyalty to the Khan. This radical restructuring forged a military force unlike any the world had ever witnessed, a disciplined and cohesive juggernaut capable of sweeping across continents with breathtaking speed and precision. Mongol warfare was a masterful blend of agility, strategy, and deception, executed with a level of coordination that left their enemies reeling. Their horse archers, trained from childhood to ride and shoot with lethal accuracy, could fire arrows with pinpoint precision while galloping at full speed, turning their mobility into a deadly advantage. They perfected the art of the feigned retreat, a cunning tactic that lured overconfident enemies into carefully laid traps, only to be encircled and annihilated by the Mongols' swift counterattacks. Their campaigns were feats of endurance and logistics, covering over 100 miles in a single day, a testament to their unparalleled mastery of mounted warfare and their ability to sustain momentum across vast distances. Yet the Mongols' brilliance extended far beyond their prowess on the battlefield. Their strategic genius lay in their meticulous preparation and psychological warfare, which often broke their opponent's will before a single arrow was loosed. They employed an extensive network of scouts and spies who gathered intelligence on enemy movements, terrain, and weaknesses, ensuring that no campaign was launched blindly. Signal flags and other communication systems allowed their armies to coordinate complex maneuvers across sprawling battlefields, maintaining unity even in the chaos of war. Psychological tactics were wielded with chilling precision, spreading rumors of their ferocity, exaggerating their numbers, or leaving a trail of devastation to sow fear and confusion among their foes. These methods ensured that many cities surrendered without a fight, cowed by the Mongols' terrifying reputation. As they expanded their empire, conquering fortified cities that had long withstood traditional assaults, the Mongols demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt and innovate. They incorporated Chinese and Persian siege engineers into their ranks, learning the intricacies of advanced siegecraft. With these new allies, they mastered the construction and deployment of catapults, trebuchets, flaming arrows, and battering rams, tools that allowed them to breach even the most formidable city walls with devastating efficiency. This adaptability was not merely technical but cultural, as they absorbed and synthesized the knowledge of the peoples they conquered, turning their enemies' strengths into their own. The Mongols' military success was underpinned by a logistical sophistication that matched their martial prowess. Their armies travelled light, relying on their herds for sustenance and their mobility to outpace supply lines that would have slowed sedentary forces. Each warrior carried multiple horses, allowing them to switch mounts and maintain relentless speed without exhausting their animals. Their campaigns were planned with meticulous attention to the seasons, terrain, and resources, ensuring that their forces were always positioned for maximum impact. This logistical mastery allowed them to sustain prolonged campaigns across diverse landscapes, from the frozen steppes of Mongolia to the arid deserts of Central Asia and the fertile plains of Eastern Europe. Their ability to coordinate vast armies across thousands of miles, often operating in multiple theatres simultaneously, was a testament to their organizational genius and the loyalty instilled by Genghis Khan's merit-based system. This system rewarded talent and dedication, regardless of birth, fostering a sense of unity and purpose that bound warriors from disparate tribes into a single, unstoppable force. The Mongols' ability to blend nomadic traditions with the technologies and strategies of settled civilizations created a military machine that was both flexible and formidable, capable of adapting to any challenge while retaining the speed and ferocity that defined their nomadic roots. But the Mongols were not merely destroyers. Their empire became a conduit for global connection, reviving the Silk Road and ensuring safe passage from China to Europe. Goods, ideas, and even diseases, like the Black Death, flowed along their vast network. They introduced innovations such as paper currency, standardized passports, and a policy of religious tolerance, allowing Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists to travel and trade under their protection, provided they submitted to Mongol authority. Yet, at their core, they remained nomads. Even as they governed sprawling empires, Mongol rulers returned to their jurs, their herds, and the open steppe. They conquered cities but never fully belonged to them, their hearts tethered to the wind and the freedom it carried. To the settled empires, nomads were a paradox. Valuable allies one moment, existential threats the next. For nomads, the boundary between trade and raid was fluid, dictated by circumstance, season, or the terms of an agreement. Trade was essential to their survival. Unable to grow crops or craft pottery, they relied on settled societies for tools, textiles, spices, and luxury goods. In exchange, they offered livestock, furs, leather, salt, and exotic items like falcons or rare horses. Their caravans, often heavily armed, served as vital links along the Silk Road, the Incense Route, and other transcontinental pathways, acting as middlemen between distant civilizations. The Scythians traded grain and gold with Greek cities along the Black Sea, but betrayal meant fire and retribution. The Bedouins safeguarded caravans of incense and spices across Arabia, unless protection fees were withheld, redirecting the camel's course. The Mongols sought peaceful trade with the Khwarezmian Empire, but when their merchants were slaughtered, they unleashed annihilation, leveling entire cities. For nomads, trade was not just commerce. It was a deeply personal and political act, a reflection of mutual respect. Treat them as equals and prosperity followed. Disrespect them and the response came on horseback, swift and unforgiving. This dynamic gave rise to unique border zones, where towns and cities on the edges of nomadic territories became hybrid spaces, part marketplace, part fortress. Governors bribed chieftains to secure peace, while tribes traded goods, horses, and intelligence. Marriages were sometimes arranged to cement fragile alliances. This interplay between trade and raid was not a weakness but a cornerstone of nomadic power, allowing them to exert influence without occupying land, to shape empires while remaining unbound by their structures. They did not need to conquer cities, they needed only to keep cities watching the horizon, wary of the dust clouds that signal their approach. In an era without libraries, scrolls, or printing presses, how did nomads preserve their history? The answer was both simple and profound. They remembered it. Oral tradition was not merely a storytelling tool, it was their library, their courtroom, their constitution, and their mythos, all woven into the spoken word. Across the Scythian steppes, the Mongol plains, and the Bedouin deserts, memory was sacred, and the spoken word carried the weight of a blade. Elders were more than respected figures. They were living repositories of knowledge, holding lineages that stretched back a dozen generations, war stories that defined tribal identity, and proverbs that guided decisions in times of peace and conflict. These were not idle tales spun for amusement, but lessons, warnings, and laws that shaped the community. Among the Bedouins, poetry was a revered art form, its practitioners as vital as warriors. A single verse could shame an enemy, honor a fallen hero, or resolve a dispute. Poets, or shair, served as advisors to tribal leaders, their words capable of igniting wars or brokering peace. Their memories were flawless, preserving entire epics word for word across generations. The Mongols too relied on oral tradition. Their secret history of the Mongols began as a spoken saga, capturing not only the rise of Genghis Khan, but the values of loyalty, fate, revenge, and ambition that defined their world. It was a living narrative, recited to teach and unify. Even the Scythians, who left no written records, maintained detailed oral accounts of their migrations, battles, and alliances. When Greek historians like Herodotus recorded their stories, they were capturing fragments of a much older spoken tradition, passed down through the glow of campfires. Oral tradition carried risks. Memories could fade, stories could evolve, but its strength lay in its adaptability. It was flexible, human, and deeply alive, allowing nomadic societies to preserve their identity through migrations, defeats, or cultural shifts. Empires might crumble, their archives reduced to dust, but nomadic stories endured, woven into the breath of those who told them. As long as someone remembered, nothing was truly lost. In many ancient civilizations, women were relegated to the margins, silent, veiled, or confined within palace walls. But in nomadic societies, the reality was often strikingly different. The demands of a mobile life required every member of the community to contribute, granting women roles of power and agency. From the Scythians to the Mongols, evidence, both archaeological and historical, reveals women as riders, warriors, shamans, diplomats, and clan leaders. Among the Scythians, burial sites across the steppes have uncovered women interred with swords, arrows, and armor, their bones bearing the marks of combat. These were not symbolic burials. These women fought, their prowess immortalized in Greek myths of the Amazons, fierce warrior women likely inspired by these nomadic fighters. In Mongol society, women managed sprawling encampments while men waged war, but their influence extended far beyond the domestic sphere. Genghis Khan's daughters and daughters-in-law governed territories, led armies, and conducted diplomacy. Sorghitani Beki, one of the most formidable women in Mongol history, was a strategist and kingmaker, raising emperors and forging alliances that shaped the empire's future. Among the Bedouins, women's roles were less public but no less vital. Through poetry, family alliances, and the sacred traditions of hospitality, they wielded significant influence. A woman's tent was her domain, where she managed resources, upheld the tribe's honor, and raised the next generation of warriors. In some tribes, women could initiate divorce, control property, or even own camels, the ultimate symbol of wealth and survival. Religion, too, granted women authority. In Turkic and Siberian steppe cultures, female shamans served as healers, spirit guides, and keepers of ancestral wisdom, holding positions of respect at the heart of their communities. The nomadic life's unpredictability demanded flexibility, fostering a pragmatic equality absent in many settled societies. When a man fell in battle, a woman could step into his role without fanfare, without permission, wielding both the cradle and the bow with equal strength. For nomadic peoples, spirituality was not confined to the rigid walls of temples or the sanctity of sacred buildings. It was intricately woven into the very essence of the land, the sky, and the ceaseless journey that defined their existence. Their gods were not distant deities enshrined in stone, but vibrant forces that travelled alongside them, their beliefs deeply rooted in the animistic and nature-based rhythms of the world they inhabited. The wind was more than a fleeting breeze, it was a divine messenger, carrying whispers of the sacred. Mountains stood as silent guardians, watching over their paths. Rivers flowed with the spirits of the unseen, their currents alive with meaning. And fire, burning at the heart of their camps, was a sacred force, a symbol of life and continuity. Every moment of their lives was a dialogue with the invisible forces that shaped their world, a constant communion with the elements that surrounded them. Among the Scythians, as chronicled by the Greek historian Herodotus, worship revolved around a pantheon intimately tied to the natural world. Tabete, the goddess of the hearth, akin to the Greek Hestia, embodied the warmth and unity of the home, while Papaios, the sky god, ruled over the vast expanse above. Their rituals were raw, unpolished, and deeply visceral, horse sacrifices performed under the boundless skies, clouds of cannabis smoke rising in sacred ceremonies to connect with the divine, and solemn oaths sworn in the presence of their gods, binding warriors and tribes alike. These practices were not confined to sanctuaries but unfolded in the open, where the earth and sky bore witness to their devotion. The Bedouins, before the rise of Islam, practiced a form of polytheism that centered on local deities and tribal idols, but their deepest reverence was reserved for the mysterious forces of fate and nature that governed their desert world. Jinn, or spirits, were believed to dwell in the rocks, windstorms, and desolate expanses of the wilderness, their presence felt in the eerie silence of a sandstorm or the rustle of a lonely oasis. Poets, revered as seers, were thought to be inspired or even possessed by these enigmatic entities, their words carrying the weight of divine insight. Hospitality, known as karam, was not merely a social custom but a spiritual imperative, a sacred duty to offer food, water, and protection to any stranger for 3 days, no questions asked. This act of generosity was a reflection of their belief in the interconnectedness of all life, a way to honor the unseen forces that guided their survival in the harsh desert. In Mongol culture, spirituality was anchored in Tengriism, a profound worship of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Tengri was not a deity confined to a temple or a statue, but the sky itself, an ever-present, all-seeing force that watched and judged their actions. Genghis Khan claimed his right to rule was a mandate from Tengri's divine will, a celestial endorsement of his conquests. The Mongols also revered earth spirits, ancestral ghosts who lingered in the winds, and the sacred fire that burned at the center of every gur, symbolizing life, purity, and continuity. Shamans held a central role in their society, serving as healers, spirit guides, and political advisors, acting as bridges between the mortal and divine realms. These spiritual leaders interpreted signs, communed with ancestors, and advised Khans on matters of war and governance, their influence permeating every aspect of Mongol life. The beauty of nomadic spirituality lay in its remarkable adaptability. As nomads encountered Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and other religious traditions, they did not cling rigidly to their own beliefs, but wove these new influences into their spiritual tapestry, creating a fluid, ever-evolving faith. Mongol emperors, for instance, patronized multiple religions, fostering an environment where a Muslim merchant, a Christian priest, and a Buddhist monk could coexist under their rule, provided they respected Mongol authority. Similarly, Bedouins could adhere to Islamic law while preserving ancient desert traditions, blending the new with the old in a seamless dance of belief. Unlike the temples of sedentary civilizations, which sought to contain the divine within walls of stone, nomads carried their sacred beliefs with them, wherever their journeys led. Their gods moved with their caravans, their rituals adapted to new landscapes, and their faith flowed like the rivers they crossed, requiring only the sky above, the earth below, and the memories held in between to sustain it. The nomads left no towering pyramids, no grand cathedrals, no bustling capitals to be etched onto modern maps, yet their legacy is woven indelibly into the very fabric of history, through the vibrant arteries of trade, the enduring scars of conquest, and the languages that continue to shape human discourse today. Far from being mere footnotes in the chronicles of time, they were architects of disruption, reshaping entire continents through their relentless, dynamic movement. The Silk Road, often romanticized as a mere trade route for silk and spices, was far more. It was a lifeline forged by the hooves of nomadic horses, sustained by the nomads' unparalleled diplomacy, raw physical strength, and an intimate, almost sacred knowledge of the terrain they traversed. Without their tireless efforts, the cultural and economic exchanges that bridged East and West might never have flourished, leaving the world fragmented and isolated. Empires with their rigid hierarchies and fortified cities feared these nomads, and with good reason. The Scythians, Xiongnu, Turks and Mongols shattered the enduring myth that civilization required fixed settlements and stone walls to thrive. Their victories revealed a profound truth. Mobility, with its fluidity and adaptability, could outsmart and outmaneuver the static monuments of settled societies. While empires lumbered under the weight of bureaucracy, infrastructure, and territorial disputes, nomads moved with the swiftness of the wind, their strategies as unpredictable as the landscapes they crossed. Where cities relied on towering fortifications to assert dominance, nomads placed their trust in the speed, agility, and resilience of their horses, which became extensions of their will and instruments of their power. Their influence extended far beyond the battlefield, transcending the chaos of war to serve as vital cultural bridges that connected distant civilizations. The nomads carried not only goods but also the intangible treasures of human culture, music that echoed across steppes, culinary traditions that blended flavors from disparate regions, oral stories that preserved the wisdom of generations, and religious practices that shaped spiritual landscapes. Under Mongol rule, the spread of Chinese printing technology to Persia marked a revolution in the dissemination of knowledge, enabling ideas to travel faster and farther than ever before. Bedouin customs of poetry, law, and honor profoundly shaped the early Islamic world, weaving their values into the cultural and legal frameworks that would define a civilization. Their poetic traditions, rich with metaphor and rhythm, became a cornerstone of Islamic literature, while their codes of honor influenced concepts of justice and community. Turkish nomads, with their mobile heritage, laid the foundational stones for the Ottoman Empire, their traditions of adaptability and resilience informing its rise as a global power. The paths these nomads traversed, whether through the windswept steppes, the scorching deserts, or the rugged mountains, became the arteries of civilization, pulsing with the flow of ideas, goods, and innovations that enriched the world. Even after their empires faded into the annals of history, their spirit endured, alive in the elegance of modern horsemanship, where the bond between rider and horse remains a testament to their legacy. The enduring power of oral storytelling traditions, passed down through generations, continues to captivate and instruct, while the values of kinship, resilience, and independence resonate across the steppes, deserts, and tundras, echoing in the lives of those who still honor their nomadic roots. The nomads also stand as a timeless warning to humanity. No structure, no matter how grand or imposing, is eternal. They proved that borders drawn with the arrogance of permanence could be swept away by the wind, that power need not be anchored in stone to be real or enduring. Their ability to disrupt empires, to challenge the very notion of fixed power, serves as a reminder of the impermanence of human constructs. Today, nomadic peoples persist, though their numbers dwindle under the relentless pressures of modern borders, climate change, and the encroaching tide of urbanization. These forces threaten to erode their way of life, confining their freedom to the margins of a world increasingly dominated by cities and nations. Yet their descendants carry forward traditions far older than most modern states: hospitality to strangers, a practice rooted in the sacred duty to share resources in harsh environments, a deep reverence for the natural world, which they view not as a resource to exploit but as a partner in their survival, and stories that gallop through generations like horses charging through the mist, carrying the wisdom, humor, and resilience of their ancestors. When studying history, do not fixate solely on the towering walls, the ornate temples, or the gilded thrones that symbolize sedentary power. Look instead to the spaces in between, the vast open landscapes where the nomads roamed, where their hooves stirred the dust, and where the course of history was irrevocably shaped by their movement, their courage, and their enduring legacy. The nomad's role in history was not merely to disrupt, but to connect, to weave together the disparate threads of human civilization into a richer, more vibrant tapestry. Their trade routes, like the Silk Road, were not just paths for commerce, but conduits for cultural exchange, where ideas, technologies, and beliefs flowed freely. The Mongols, for instance, facilitated the movement of gunpowder from China to Europe, a transfer that would alter the course of warfare and history. The Scythians, through their interactions with Greek colonies, introduced new artistic motifs and trade goods that influenced Hellenistic culture. The Xiongnu, often overshadowed by their successors, played a critical role in shaping the early dynamics of Central Asia, their conflicts with the Han dynasty pushing the boundaries of Chinese influence and trade. The Turks, with their nomadic origins, carried their traditions into the heart of the Ottoman Empire, blending steppe mobility with imperial ambition to create a hybrid civilization that spanned continents. These nomads were not peripheral to history, but central to it, their movements creating ripples that touched every corner of the ancient world. Their cultural contributions were as profound as their military triumphs. The music they carried, songs sung around campfires, melodies that echoed the rhythms of hooves and wind, became part of the cultural heritage of the regions they touched. Bedouin poetry, with its intricate rhythms and vivid imagery, influenced Arabic literature, shaping the way stories were told and histories recorded. Their culinary traditions, born of necessity in harsh environments, introduced new ingredients and techniques to settled societies, enriching their diets and cultures. The nomads' religious practices, rooted in animism and later blended with major world religions, created a spiritual legacy that endures in the syncretic traditions of Central Asia and the Middle East. Their oral storytelling, a necessity in a world without written records, preserved not only their history, but also their values, loyalty to kin, resilience in adversity, and a fierce independence that defied the constraints of settled life. These stories, passed down through generations, remain a living link to the past, a reminder of the nomad's enduring influence. The nomad's legacy is also a challenge to modern assumptions about progress and permanence. In a world obsessed with building ever taller skyscrapers and drawing ever stricter borders, the nomads remind us that true power lies in adaptability, in the ability to move with the rhythms of the world rather than against them. Their lives were a testament to the strength of community, where survival depended on mutual support and shared purpose. Their hospitality, born of the desert's harsh lessons, reflects a worldview that values human connection over material wealth. Their reverence for nature, seeing spirits in every river and mountain, offers a perspective that contrasts sharply with modern exploitation of the environment. Even as their numbers decline, their traditions endure in the practices of their descendants, who continue to live by the codes of their ancestors, whether in the steppes of Mongolia, the deserts of Arabia, or the tundras of Siberia. In reflecting on the nomads' place in history, it becomes clear that their impact was not confined to the moments of their triumphs or the territories they roamed. They were catalysts for change, their movements sparking interactions that shaped the course of civilizations. The Silk Road, the incense route, and other trade networks were not just economic pathways but cultural highways, where the nomads' knowledge and mobility enabled the exchange of ideas that would define the ancient and medieval worlds. Their conquests, while often brutal, forced empires to adapt, to innovate, and to rethink their assumptions about power and security. Their cultural contributions, music, poetry, religion, and storytelling, enriched the societies they touched, leaving a legacy that persists in the languages, traditions, and values of countless cultures. When we study history, we are often drawn to the tangible relics of the past: the pyramids of Egypt, the Parthenon of Athens, the Great Wall of China. But the nomads urge us to look beyond these monuments, to the open spaces where their tents once stood, where their horses galloped, and where their stories were told. Their history is not written in stone, but in the wind, in the songs of their poets, and in the memories of their descendants. It is a history of movement, of resilience, and of a profound connection to the world. To understand the nomads is to understand the spaces between the empires, the moments between the battles, and the voices that carried their legacy through time. It is to recognize that history is not only the story of those who built walls, but also of those who rode beyond them, shaping the world in ways that no monument could ever contain. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, 1869. In the mid-19th century, the United States stood as a nation fractured not only by deep political divisions but also by its sprawling and formidable geography. The eastern seaboard thrived as a hub of commerce, with vibrant cities, humming factories, and busy ports driving economic growth. In stark contrast, the West remained a vast, untamed frontier, characterized by towering mountains, arid deserts, and the allure of gold fields that drew adventurers and dreamers. Between these two worlds lay a daunting expanse of over 1,700 miles of rugged wilderness, an almost impassable barrier that separated the nation's coasts. Traveling from New York to California was a monumental undertaking, requiring either a perilous sea voyage lasting weeks around the treacherous Cape Horn, or a months-long overland journey by wagon, fraught with dangers like disease, bandit attacks, and relentless dust storms that tested the endurance of even the hardiest pioneers. Yet, amid this divided landscape, a transformative vision took shape: a transcontinental railroad, a network of steel rails that would bind the nation from coast to coast. To skeptics, this ambition seemed a fanciful impossibility, a dream too grand for a fractured nation to achieve. To visionaries, however, it was an inevitable step toward progress, a means to unify a republic torn by conflict, accelerate communication across vast distances, mobilize armies, open new markets, and bring order to the wild frontier. Realizing this vision, however, demanded more than bold ideas. It required unprecedented resources, a massive labor force, vast tracts of land, and the political maneuvering to align a divided government behind a singular goal. The spark for this monumental endeavor came during the darkest days of the Civil War. In 1862, as the nation grappled with its own internal strife, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railway Act, a landmark piece of legislation that set the stage for one of the most ambitious infrastructure projects in history. The act empowered two railroad companies, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, to undertake the Herculean task of constructing the railroad from opposite ends of the continent. The Union Pacific would begin in Omaha, Nebraska, pushing westward across the Great Plains, while the Central Pacific would start in Sacramento, California, driving eastward through the formidable Sierra Nevada mountains. Their tracks would converge at a yet-to-be-determined point, knitting the nation together. To incentivize this colossal effort, the federal government offered substantial rewards. For every mile of track laid, each company received up to 640 acres of public land and generous loans, transforming the project into a race not just for national unity, but for land, wealth, and a place in history. On paper, the plan was a marvel of engineering ambition, a testament to human ingenuity. In reality, it would become one of the most grueling and costly construction efforts in American history. Workers would face unimaginable challenges, blasting through solid rock, bridging vast plains, and enduring the extremes of bitter winters and scorching desert heat. Thousands of laborers, many of them immigrants drawn by the promise of work, would be recruited to toil under brutal conditions. The rewards promised to reshape the nation, but the human and cultural costs would be staggering. For the indigenous nations whose lands lay in the path of the advancing rails, this was not a symbol of progress but a profound threat, a scar across their territories that heralded displacement and loss. In 1862, the project was a bold gamble, its success uncertain. Yet, within 7 years, the two rail lines would meet in the Utah desert, forever altering the course of American history. For the Union Pacific, the journey westward from Omaha began across the seemingly endless Great Plains, a landscape that appeared deceptively simple with its flat, open terrain. However, the challenges were not rooted in geography, but in the complex interplay of human conflict, political maneuvering, and raw ambition. The workforce was a diverse tapestry, primarily composed of Irish immigrants, many of whom had fled famine and oppression in their homeland, alongside former Union soldiers and freed African Americans seeking stability in the wake of the Civil War. These laborers could lay 2 to 3 miles of track in a single day, a remarkable feat enabled by the open plains. Yet, this pace came at a cost. The exposed terrain left workers vulnerable to raids, starvation, and the harsh winds of nature, blistering heat, freezing cold, and sudden storms. The plains were not empty. They were the ancestral lands of the Pawnee, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota Sioux, tribes who had lived, hunted, and thrived there for generations. To them, the railroad was an existential threat. A steel intrusion that sliced through their hunting grounds, disrupted buffalo herds with the roar of smoke-belching locomotives, and desecrated sacred sites with the erection of telegraph poles and the presence of surveyors. The tribes understood what was at stake: the arrival of settlers, soldiers, fences, and the inevitable erosion of their way of life. Resistance was not just likely, it was certain. Under leaders like Red Cloud, the Lakota Sioux launched fierce attacks on work camps, survey teams, and newly laid tracks, tearing up rails in a desperate bid to halt the invasion. The US government responded with force, establishing forts along the route and deploying troops to protect the workers. Railroad construction became a militarized operation, with laborers toiling under the watchful eyes of armed guards. This low-grade war, fought with rifles and fragile treaties, underscored the profound cost of progress. For the indigenous nations, the railroad was not a triumph but a death knell, a harbinger of displacement and cultural erasure. Yet, the Union Pacific pressed forward, fueled by massive federal loans and driven by figures like Thomas Durant, a financier more concerned with stock manipulation than engineering excellence. Crews lived in transient settlements known as Hell on Wheels, ramshackle towns that sprang up overnight, filled with gambling dens, saloons, and violence, only to vanish as the tracks moved on. By 1867, the Union Pacific had reached Cheyenne, Wyoming, with the Rocky Mountains looming on the horizon. The physical challenges were daunting, but the true obstacle was political: how to forge a unified nation while building over the remains of another's way of life. For the Union Pacific, the answer was unwavering: lay the track and keep moving forward, no matter the cost. In stark contrast to the Union Pacific's relatively manageable journey across the Great Plains, the Central Pacific confronted an extraordinarily daunting physical challenge from the very start: the Sierra Nevada mountains. These were not mere rolling hills or gentle slopes, but a formidable range of towering granite peaks, their rugged faces sculpted by millennia of natural forces. The Sierras were a landscape of extremes, prone to catastrophic avalanches that could bury entire camps, deep snowdrifts that piled up to 40 feet in winter, and terrain so unforgiving it seemed to defy any attempt at human intervention. The absence of dynamite, which would later revolutionize large-scale construction projects, compounded the difficulty, forcing workers to rely on rudimentary hand tools, chisels, picks, and shovels, and volatile black powder for blasting. Construction began in Sacramento in 1863, but just 80 miles east, the Sierras loomed as a near-impenetrable barrier, a natural fortress that tested the limits of human endurance and ingenuity. Each mile of track laid was not merely a step forward, but a grueling, hard-fought battle against the raw power of nature itself, requiring a workforce of extraordinary resilience and determination to overcome conditions that seemed designed to break both body and spirit. The Central Pacific's initial labor force consisted primarily of Irish immigrants and white laborers, drawn to the promise of steady work in a post-Civil War economy. However, the brutal conditions of the Sierras quickly overwhelmed many of these workers. The relentless cold, treacherous terrain, and constant danger of rock slides and avalanches drove scores to desert the project. Unwilling or unable to endure the punishing demands, faced with a dwindling workforce and mounting delays, the company turned to an unlikely but ultimately indispensable source of labor: Chinese immigrants, many hailing from Guangdong province, a region marked by economic hardship and political instability. By 1865, over 10,000 Chinese workers had joined the Central Pacific, comprising more than 80% of its workforce. These laborers, often recruited directly from China or from communities in California, were paid significantly less than their white counterparts, frequently receiving wages as low as $1.00 a day compared to the $2.00 or more earned by others. They were also housed in perilous makeshift camps, often perched precariously on mountainsides or buried under snow, and faced pervasive racism from supervisors, fellow workers, and the broader society. Despite these injustices, the Chinese laborers proved to be the backbone of the project, demonstrating unparalleled skill, endurance, and discipline that transformed the Central Pacific's fortunes. Their work was both heroic and horrific, a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. The labor required to conquer the Sierras was nothing short of monumental. Using only hand tools and black powder, workers carved tunnels through solid granite, a painstaking process that demanded precision and courage. Each tunnel was a feat of endurance, with crews laboring in dark, suffocating conditions, chiseling away at rock inch by inch, often under the constant threat of cave-ins or misfired explosions. The infamous Tunnel No. 6, one of the most challenging sections of the route, took nearly 2 years to complete, from 1866 to 1868. Workers faced not only the physical challenge of the rock, but also the brutal Sierra winters, where snowdrifts reached depths of 40 feet, burying camps and forcing laborers to live in underground shelters, connected by vertical shafts that served as both ventilation and lifelines to the surface. These shafts, resembling chimneys, were often the only means of accessing food, supplies, or fresh air, creating a claustrophobic existence where survival was a daily struggle. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, perished in avalanches that swept down the mountainsides, in explosions caused by the unpredictable black powder, or in rock slides triggered by the relentless blasting. The exact number of deaths remains uncertain, as records of individual Chinese workers were rarely kept, their sacrifices fading into the anonymity of history. To accelerate progress through this unforgiving landscape, the Chinese crews employed daring and innovative methods that underscored their ingenuity and bravery. In some instances, workers were lowered in woven reed baskets over sheer cliffs, suspended by ropes as they chipped away at the granite face with hand tools, dangling hundreds of feet above jagged ravines. This perilous technique allowed them to create ledges for blasting or to begin carving tunnels from the outside in, a process that required nerves of steel and an almost superhuman tolerance for danger. When mountains could not be bypassed, the workers tunneled through them, drilling and blasting their way through solid rock in a grueling cycle that could take months for a single passage. When the terrain was too steep or uneven to lay track directly, they constructed towering wooden trestles, engineering marvels that spanned deep ravines and gorges. These trestles, some rising hundreds of feet, were built with timber hauled from distant forests, assembled with meticulous care under constant threat of collapse or sabotage by the elements. The labor was relentless, 12-hour shifts in freezing cold or scorching heat, with workers subsisting on meager rations and enduring the physical toll of repetitive, back-breaking tasks. The Chinese laborers' ability to maintain their health and productivity was remarkable, often attributed to their practice of boiling water for tea, which reduced waterborne illnesses, and their reliance on traditional foods like rice and dried fish, which they prepared themselves, in contrast to the less sanitary diets of other workers. This work, though critical to the railroad's success, was among the most dangerous and underappreciated in American history. The Chinese laborers faced not only physical hazards, but also systemic discrimination, with supervisors and newspapers often dismissing them as weak or inferior, only to be proven wrong by their extraordinary contributions. They were excluded from the camaraderie and recognition afforded to white workers, and their living conditions were often deplorable. Crowded, flimsy camps, exposed to the elements, with little protection from the cold or the constant threat of falling rocks. Yet, their discipline and work ethic were unmatched. They developed efficient systems for coordinating tasks, from synchronized blasting to carefully orchestrated track laying, that allowed the Central Pacific to make steady progress despite the odds. Their contributions extended beyond manual labor. Many brought knowledge of engineering and construction techniques from China, adapting. The story of the Transcontinental Railroad is often romanticized with images of golden spikes and celebrated tycoons, but its true essence is rooted in the sweat, sacrifice, and suffering of countless laborers whose names were rarely recorded and whose graves often went unmarked. On the Central Pacific, nearly 15,000 Chinese laborers endured freezing temperatures, deadly explosions, and systemic racism to conquer the Sierra Nevada. Paid less than white workers and relegated to inferior camps, they persisted with quiet determination, proving themselves the most reliable workforce on the project. They blasted rock, laid rails, constructed trestles, and sustained themselves with their own provisions, often maintaining better health than their counterparts. Yet when the final spike was driven at Promontory Point, they were excluded from the celebratory photograph, their contributions erased from the official narrative. On the Union Pacific, Irish immigrants, many of whom had survived famine and war, faced new dangers on the plains. They repelled raids, laid track at astonishing speeds, and sought refuge in makeshift tents, where exhaustion and hardship were constant companions. Freed African Americans also played a vital role, seeking better lives as hired labourers, though their contributions, like those of the Chinese and Irish, were largely overlooked. This multinational workforce, augmented by cooks, blacksmiths, teamsters and supply haulers, built a nation with calloused hands and weary bodies. They were not executives or visionaries, yet their labour was the foundation of the railroad's success. The American narrative often elevates the tycoons and politicians, but the rails were laid by marginalized workers who reshaped history without the promise of recognition. They built not for glory but for survival, their efforts a testament to resilience in the face of exploitation. By the late 1860s, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific were no longer merely constructing a railroad. They were locked in a frenzied competition, racing toward an undefined meeting point in the Utah Territory. This was no collaborative endeavor, but a high-stakes battle for land, profit, and prestige, fueled by a government subsidy system that rewarded each mile of track with land grants and substantial loans. The more track a company laid, the greater its financial gain, leading to absurd extremes. Crews even laid parallel tracks in opposite directions, fully aware that only one set would be used. The Central Pacific, fresh from its triumph over the Sierra Nevada, now navigated the arid expanses of Nevada and Utah, where the flat terrain allowed for faster progress, but brought its own challenges of heat and scarcity. The Union Pacific, meanwhile, crossed rivers and high plains, skirting the edges of the Rocky Mountains, sometimes laying track in areas they knew would be deemed wasteful simply to secure funding. The pace was relentless, bordering on manic. In April 1869, the Central Pacific's Chinese crews achieved a world record, laying an astonishing 10 miles of track in a single day, a feat unmatched even today, accomplished through synchronized teams, rotating shifts, and a rhythm perfected through years of grueling labor. The Union Pacific, despite facing labor strikes, supply shortages, and mismanagement by financier Thomas Durant, who prioritized financial schemes over engineering, pushed eastward with equal determination. As the tracks converged at Promontory Summit in present-day Utah, surveyors marked the historic meeting point. Preparations were made for a grand ceremony, with the Central Pacific's Jupiter and the Union Pacific's number 119 locomotives positioned nose to nose, their cowcatchers nearly touching. Executives drafted speeches, a golden spike was specially commissioned, and telegraph lines were connected to transmit the final hammer blows to a waiting nation. Yet, beneath the pomp and celebration, lay a sobering reality. The race had been brutal, often reckless, and driven by profit above all else. The rails now connected the nation, but the scars they left, on the land, the workers, and entire communities, would endure for generations. Progress had a finish line, and both companies were willing to trample over any obstacle to cross it. On May 10, 1869, the windswept plains of Promontory Summit, Utah, became the epicenter of American ambition. A diverse crowd of workers, officials, journalists, and railroad executives gathered to witness the culmination of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Central Pacific's Jupiter and the Union Pacific's number 119 stood facing each other, separated by a single rail and a golden spike inscribed with a hopeful invocation. May God continue the unity of our country as this railroad unites the two great oceans of the world. Telegraph lines were linked to the ceremonial hammer, each strike destined to send an electric signal across the nation. As Leland Stanford, representing the Central Pacific, raised the sledgehammer, Americans from coast to coast paused to listen. With each swing, the telegraph clicked, "Done," triggering a wave of celebrations. Church bells tolled, cannons boomed, and crowds erupted in cities from New York to San Francisco. The East and West, once separated by months of travel, were now a mere 7 days apart by rail. This engineering triumph bound the nation with steel and steam, symbolizing a young post-Civil War America's capacity to heal its fractures and step boldly into a modern industrial era. Yet, the celebration was far from inclusive. The Chinese workers, who had laid the majority of the Central Pacific's tracks, were conspicuously absent from the ceremony in its iconic photograph, their monumental contributions overlooked. Irish labourers, freedmen, native guides, and other marginalised workers were similarly excluded. their places taken by executives in frock coats brandishing hammers and cigars. The railroad united coasts, but it also deepened divides of race, class, and culture. It connected markets at the cost of countless lives, its official narrative captured in a single photograph, while the true story of sacrifice, exploitation, and loss remained buried beneath the tracks. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad did more than shrink the nation's geography. It unleashed an economic revolution, virtually overnight. The United States, once a bicoastal nation awkwardly divided by wilderness, became a single dynamic economic entity, pulsing with commerce, movement, and opportunity. Goods that once took months to transport by wagon or ship now crossed the continent in under a week. Agricultural products from the Midwest, wheat, corn, cattle, flowed westward to booming mining towns and eastward to industrial cities, while manufactured goods moved in the opposite direction. Rail cars replaced oxen, steam supplanted sail, and the frontier transformed into a profitable supply chain. Railroad towns sprang up like wildfire along the tracks, some blossoming into permanent cities, others fading as quickly as they appeared when rail routes shifted. Each town was a vital node in a growing network, connected by the rhythmic churn of locomotives. The railroad fueled industrial growth on an unprecedented scale. Ironworks, coal mines, and timber mills surged to meet the demand for rails, locomotives, and infrastructure, creating jobs across the nation. Steel magnates and railroad tycoons amassed vast fortunes, bankers profited, and small-scale entrepreneurs seized opportunities, opening hotels, restaurants, and general stores along the route. Mail delivery accelerated, news traversed time zones in days rather than weeks, and the federal government gained the ability to project its authority across the continent, deploying troops, resources, and political influence wherever the rails extended. The human impact was equally profound. Millions migrated westward, including European immigrants who disembarked in New York and saw a direct path to land and labor in California, Oregon, and beyond. Homesteaders, prospectors, ranchers, and even outlaws rode the same steel rails toward their destinies. Yet this prosperity was far from equitable. Wealth concentrated among elites, indigenous lands were appropriated, and laborers remained trapped in poverty. The railroad transformed the United States from a regional republic into a continental powerhouse, moving not just people, but money, influence, and the future itself. Once set in motion, its momentum was unstoppable. Beneath the polished steel rails and celebratory headlines of the Transcontinental Railroad lies a profound and often ignored tragedy: the catastrophic devastation of indigenous lands, lives, and cultures. Far from merely linking the East and West, the railroad carved a destructive path through the ancestral homelands of the Lakota, Cheyenne, Shoshone, Ute, Arapaho, Pawnee, and countless other tribes, leaving a legacy of fragmentation and loss. The iron tracks, telegraph poles, and fences that accompanied them sliced through sacred grounds, hunting territories, and communal spaces that had sustained these peoples for generations. Each spike driven into the earth was not just a physical act, but a symbolic blow to native sovereignty, eroding the autonomy and cultural foundations of communities that had thrived long before the arrival of settlers. The impact was swift and devastating. Buffalo herds, the lifeblood of Plains tribes' economies, diets, and spiritual practices, were decimated in a calculated effort to clear the way for trains and settlers. These herds, which once roamed in the tens of millions across the vast plains, were reduced to near extinction within a few decades. In a particularly cruel twist, passengers on passing trains were encouraged to shoot buffalo for sport, turning a sacred resource into a target for amusement and further accelerating the collapse of tribal ways of life. The railroad's arrival brought more than tracks. It unleashed waves of settlers, soldiers, surveyors, and speculators, each wave further encroaching on indigenous lands. Towns sprang up where none had existed, and homesteaders, empowered by government-backed policies like the Homestead Act, staked claims on territories that had been promised to tribes through treaties that were often ignored or broken. What little land remained untouched by earlier agreements was swiftly absorbed by the railroad's relentless expansion. To protect the tracks and ensure their completion, the US government established military garrisons along the route, deploying troops to suppress any resistance. This escalation turned the plains into a battleground, with conflicts ranging from skirmishes to large-scale confrontations, some labelled as uprisings, and others as outright massacres. From Red Cloud's War, where the Lakota fought fiercely to protect their lands, to the Battle of Little Bighorn, where tribes made a desperate stand against encroaching forces, the railroads were both the spark and the prize of these struggles. Despite their fierce resistance, indigenous nations were ultimately overwhelmed by the combined might of military power, settler expansion, and the railroad's unstoppable advance. They were forcibly confined to reservations, often located hundreds of miles from their ancestral homelands, in areas deemed undesirable by the government. The psychological and cultural toll was incalculable. Sacred sites were desecrated, traditional hunting patterns were disrupted, and nomadic lifestyles, which had been defined by seasonal migration and the freedom of open spaces, were replaced by confinement, surveillance, and dependency on government rations. Entire ways of life were upended, as communities that had once moved with the rhythms of the land were forced into fixed, often barren locations. This destruction was cloaked in the rhetoric of progress, with the railroad hailed as a triumph of American ingenuity and a cornerstone of national unity. For native peoples, however, it was a catastrophe, a violent erasure of their cultures, histories, and futures, replaced by the unyielding march of iron rails and wooden ties. History books often frame the Transcontinental Railroad as a unifying force, a symbol of a nation coming together after the Civil War. Yet, for indigenous communities, it was a shattering force, tearing apart their world and leaving scars that remain raw and unhealed to this day. The narrative of progress celebrated by one nation came at the cost of countless others, whose voices and losses are too often relegated to the margins of history. The driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Summit on May 10, 1869, marked not only the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, but the dawn of a new American identity, one defined by speed, ambition, and the transformative power of industrial innovation. This monumental achievement shrank the nation's vast expanse, collapsing a journey that once took 6 months by wagon or ship into a mere 7 days by rail. The railroad fundamentally redefined the concepts of movement, trade, and distance, making the idea of a coast-to-coast nation not just a dream but a daily reality. It introduced standardized time zones to coordinate cross-country travel and commerce, a necessity born of the need to synchronize schedules across thousands of miles. Agriculture was transformed as farmers in the Midwest could now ship perishable goods, wheat, corn, cattle, to burgeoning mining towns in the West or industrial centers in the East, creating new markets and opportunities. This efficient transport of goods powered the Second Industrial Revolution, enabling raw materials like timber, coal, and iron to flow seamlessly into urban factories, fueling a manufacturing boom that reshaped the nation's economy. The rhythmic clatter of trains became the heartbeat of a modernizing America, a steady pulse of progress that reverberated from coast to coast. Culturally, the railroad reinforced the ideology of manifest destiny, the deeply held belief that the United States was destined to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This expansion no longer felt like a distant aspiration but an inevitable reality as rails stretched across deserts, scaled mountains, and crossed plains, taming the wild frontier. The vast untamed West, once a realm of mystery and danger, now seemed within reach, every corner claimable, every resource exploitable. Yet, this transformation came at a profound cost. The railroad laid the foundation for modern corporate power in America as tycoons like Leland Stanford, Thomas Durant, and Collis Huntington amassed immense wealth and influence. These railroad barons not only built tracks, but also shaped public policy, often through corrupt practices that intertwined their interests with those of the government. The Crédit Mobilier scandal, for instance, exposed how deeply railroad companies were embedded in political corruption, with executives siphoning off public funds for personal gain. For the labourers who toiled on the tracks, Chinese, Irish, African American and others, the railroad represented both opportunity and exploitation. It offered work to those desperate for employment, yet often at the cost of their dignity, safety and health, with many facing discriminatory wages and hazardous conditions. For indigenous peoples, the railroad was nothing short of apocalyptic, marking a physical and cultural rupture that severed them from their lands and traditions. The environment, too, bore the brunt of this progress. Forests were cleared to supply ties, rivers were bridged to accommodate tracks, and buffalo herds were nearly exterminated to make way for settlers and commerce. Despite these staggering costs, the railroad wove the fabric of a modern America, creating unprecedented connectivity. It linked immigrants to new opportunities in the West, connected businesses to expansive markets, and enabled the federal government to extend its authority to distant territories. The iron rails carried more than passengers and freight. They carried ambition, destruction, hope, and hubris, embodying the contradictions of a nation's striving for greatness. When the Central Pacific's Jupiter and the Union Pacific's number 119 met at Promontory Summit, their cowcatchers nearly touching in the Utah desert, the nation was irrevocably transformed. This was not a change wrought by war or political decree, but by the unrelenting force of iron and fire, a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of its profound consequences.